Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. This is season 10, episode 13. This is the podcast where we talk to cookbook authors, people who work in the publishing industry, librarians, people who sell books, and more. Today, we're talking to Nichole Beer, who has a business called Lentil Pop-Up, where she also sells cookbooks to the public. She is also a school librarian, and I have a lot of admiration for school librarians. They're often librarians that get stuff done with the least, and they can make it happen with scotch tape and baling wire. I really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to Nichole. It's so rare that I get to talk to other librarians on this podcast, and when I do, I think we end up spending more time talking shop than we do actually having an interview, and that was definitely the case today. I love Nichole. Talking to her is so wonderful. I really want to have her back on the podcast again as soon as possible, as many times as possible, because she was just a joy. I'm going to take you to that conversation now, and that is my conversation with Nichole Beer, whose business is called Lentil Pop-Up, where she sells cookbooks to the public, and as well, and most importantly, she's a school librarian. And here we go. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I'm very happy to be having on the podcast Nichole Beer of the Lentils in the Pot Cookbook Pop-Up, and she is also, in her secret life, she's a public school librarian. Nichole, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dean. Glad to be here.
Now, for our listeners who need to become more familiar with you, let's talk about where you're from and where you live now.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Battle Creek, Michigan, home of Tony the Tiger. So I guess food was sort of in me from the beginning. I've got lots of stories, and anybody from that area will know what the glorious summer days smelled like when they were doing Fruit Loops. It was a wonderful outdoor room freshener before they had room fresheners. At any rate, so I grew up there, and when I was in 10th grade, I won a scholarship to become an exchange student, and I went to Australia, and that completely changed my trajectory in life. I realized there was a huge world out there that I had seen in maps and encyclopedias. I'm dating myself now, Dean. I'm 54, so we didn't have the internet, but we had encyclopedias, and I had my public library, and that changed everything. So I came home and did a couple years at Michigan State, and found myself, after taking a respite from college, found myself in Las Vegas, and have pretty much had a relationship off and on with Las Vegas for over 30 years. So lived here for a number of years, left, lived overseas, came back, and this stint, I've been here 12 years now.
In your bio, you talk very lovingly about early food memories of cooking with your mother. Can you talk about?
I'm sorry, Dean, the last part cut out a little bit.
Sure. In your bio, you lovingly talk about early food memories of cooking with your mother. Can we talk about your earliest memories of cooking with her?
Yes, I mean, one thing that I remember was my mother grew up on a farm, right? My grandparents had very, very limited education. My grandfather worked at United Steel and Wire, walked with the Wobblies, the IWW, and was quite a local union legend in my neck of the woods. But he also had a small, I hesitate to call it a gentleman's farm, because it fed the family during the Depression and fed a lot of his neighbors as well. So he had 80 acres, back 40 and front 40. And my mom grew up with a very stern mother who wanted to provide for a family and had extensive and huge gardens. And so I've said before, I think I learned to can, preserve, and freeze vegetables before I learned how to ride a bike. So food and healthy, good food was always part of my growing up. But my first memory is I can remember my mother making pans and pans of cornbread with, I think it was like a chili. And at night, whatever sort of stale cornbread we followed on Sundays, we followed the farmer's schedule for dinner, which meant that we ate at 2 o'clock. So by 6 or 7, you're getting a little peckish before dinner, before bed. And so the leftover cornbread, she'd leave it out. It was kind of, the staler, the better. We would pour milk and a little bit of sugar on it. And it was called Johnny Cake and Milk. And that is still to this day one of my favorite things to eat. So I always hope that nobody will finish the cornbread.
My late father used to put buttermilk on his cornbread. I remember late at night as a snack. He always loved that.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if my mom on the farm had, because they did have a few cows. I wouldn't be surprised if she had buttermilk in her day on cornbread.
Now, you're also a school librarian. Now, I've always said that school librarians are the Marines of the library world because they can do anything with anything, and they have to deal with a lot of tough administrations and policies and things. Tell me about your work as a school librarian.
It is tough. It is tough work. But it sounds so trite to say, but truly when you love what you do, most of the time it doesn't feel like work. It's the adults often who are the problem. It's the adults who, don't push, I think, the needle forward, don't do what sometimes is best for kids, even though they think it's best for kids. And often, the moneyed people of the world have better ideas about education and so forth than the people who are like myself, who are rank and file, 23 years on the job. And I often wonder how many times they ask kids also. But I digress. It's a wonderful job. I love it. It's scary to feel as if at any time someone could come into building and hurt myself or my school babies. That is scary. My school is in North Las Vegas, a very urban area, but we're also close to the Air Force Base. And so we will get planes coming, like jet fighters coming through. And, sometimes when you hear that backdraft of the jet planes, I think that we're being bombed. Or I think I just hear the loud sound and wonder what the kerfuffle is and think, okay, it's go time. What am I going to do to protect these kids? And to be honest with you, that is really more on my mind than the other things. Is I'm not afraid of dying on the job. I'm afraid I won't be able to save all of them. And that's what keeps me up at night, to be honest. And other people have different worries, but clear transparency, that is what keeps me up at night. What if one of them's in the bathroom? What if they get past me? And so I've made my peace with being able to die on the job. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic or really, truly, I have. But if I can't save all of them, I don't know how I could go on. So that's really what keeps me up at night.
What's your favorite part of the job?
The things that come out of little children's mouths.
Yeah.
Being an elementary school librarian in a historically disenfranchised area with high rates of poverty in an urban area, that some of my kids have not been 4 to 5 miles away from where they live. You are the closest you'll ever be to a rock star, right? I drive a Nissan. The kids think that I have a really amazing car. They just love you. It's so unconditional and fresh. And, I'm very big into building relationships with my students and their families. And many of them, I've had all the siblings. And, I feel sorry for sort of the littlest sibling. And I had 5 of their siblings before, because all I have to say is, okay, who do I need to call? And so, they're okay, I'll be good. So it's just very family oriented. And I have a lovely school. I love it. I drive every year. The drive gets longer and longer due to traffic and more people coming. But I willingly do it because I love my administrator and the team we have, and it's kids first, and the kids are great. Some people would call them at risk. Some people would call them a lot of things in today's climate, but they're just my school babies. I just want them to read. And a victory for me is not necessarily that they go to college. A victory for me is, did they come home from the job that they worked hard all day to put a roof over their kid's head and food on the table, and did they have the time and bandwidth to read them a bedtime story? And if they did, I did okay.
Now you been doing this for a little while. Do you ever have any of them come back to you when they're older and say hi?
Yes, at least once to twice a week.
Wow, that's a
Yep.
lot.
There was sometimes it gets me really bad. I'll just start crying. Sometimes I had a young girl named Alejandra come, and she was very, very shy. And she's still shy, and she's a senior in high school. And she, woo, oh, if I can get through this story, she came and just said, "I want you to know the difference you made in my life." And yeah. So I'm a big old wimp. Don't tell anybody. I've got a reputation to protect. But yeah, some of them get me and some don't. It just depends, and love seeing them do good, of course. And she's still in school, and it's her senior year. So that's a huge victory.
So talk to me about your side business, Lentils in the Pot. How did it come to be created?
So yes, I'm probably the most haphazard planner that I know, in the sense that I knew that I wanted something. I'm about 5 to 7 years away from retirement, and I knew that I needed to retire to something, and I wanted it to be something a little bit different. And I absolutely adore food writing. I adore cookbooks, eating, anything related to food, I absolutely adore. And so it just morphed into this idea. Originally, I wanted to do brick and mortar. I wanted it to be a spot that I could have, cookbook readings, that I could have, pop-up kitchen. And maybe that will come to fruition one day, but I know that I'm also somewhat of a nomad. So the idea of being shackled to a brick and mortar kind of makes me a little nervous. I travel a lot, and I don't know who would watch the store when I wasn't there. So the pop-up idea just sort of came about as a good in-between place for my dreams. And so I did the first one, and I sold over $1,000 in cookbooks. And I was like, I don't know why I'm whispering that, but like, I didn't know if it was going to work. Like, I was like, okay, well, worst case scenario, I have gifts, my stock, right, for everybody in my life for the rest of my life. Like, oh, cookbook for Christmas, cookbook for, and so, the few $1,000 that I put into it, because cookbooks are not cheap, and the markup is not cheap, or not big, not large markup. And so I said, okay, I think this works. And so that's what I do. I do pop-ups where I think I'll fit in. And it just worked. It's working. I had one, in fact, we were communicating via email on Saturday. I was at a pop-up, did wonderfully. I wasn't sure, every time I go to a new venue, it's like, oh, I don't know. Are they going to like me? Am I going to like them? At this point, I'm reinvesting all the money, into the business. So it's not, I'm in a fortunate place where I don't have to rely on this pop-up, to pay our bills. So I think it's just a fun outlet for me. I come from a long line of government employees, whether we're teachers or social workers or what have you. We do our 30 years, we get our pension, and the rest is history kind of thing. So for me, I just don't have an entrepreneurial spirit by nature, but boy, is it fun. Even creating the little ads for social media and stuff like that. It's bringing out this whole side of me that I never even knew I had, but believe in myself. And it's fun. I'm really enjoying the journey.
Where did you get the name Lentils in the Pot?
Well, my father was, made some choices that probably had a lot to do with immigrant status, and had a lot to do with lack of opportunities, and it also had a lot to do, and this is why my life is sort of hinged around food. It also had a lot to do with the white fly epidemic in Southern California, Mexicali, El Centro, when white fly basically decimated the melon crops. And so my family on my father's side is from Greece. and they had melon farms, and they lost everything basically. But prior to that, my father was incarcerated for 11 years. So my mom was on her own, and she was a social worker. She, had her degree, but like teaching, it's not a lot of money to go around for 4 kids. And so there were times when we would have lentils with a couple carrots, a couple of potatoes, and lentils were much cheaper than ground beef or chicken or any other meat. And that's what we had. Mom got paid on Fridays, and she would usually have a side hustle of some kind, whether it was doing taxes or she had a lot of side hustles, and did whatever she could to make sure that we, had something to eat. By today's standards, and I look back, we were food insecure. So lentils is an ode to my Greek family because it's a big part of that culture. And it's an ode to my mother that even when you just have lentils in the pot, you can feed people.
It's funny. I've lived some times when we were food insecure, both as an adult and when I was a child. And I think that sticks with you. And a lot of the people and authors that I've talked to speak about that. Do you think that's kind of a unifying thing that you hear about more than once?
I would say most of the cookbook authors I might want to have a conversation with, right? Because I think there's several different kinds, but probably the people that I would gel with the best, probably people who I would see who would be interested in the same kinds of things as me. Probably we may share that, I also don't think that your narrative has to be food insecurity to understand it.
Yeah.
However, there is nothing, for example, I can claim to understand what it's like to be a Black woman in America, but I'll never feel that.
Right.
Keenly aware of my white privilege, as much as I'm keenly aware of what has turned into my food privilege.
Yeah.
I buy, expensive meat in the sense that it's non-GMO, it's grain-fed, it's, and that involves me sometimes going to several stores, which means I have a car or a mode of transportation.
Yeah.
And being able to spend, $12.99 a pound for grass-fed beef, ground beef, is not what everyone can do. So I try to preface any posts in which I'm kind of trying to preach this sort of clean living, clean eating rather, as if you're able to, because I understand that they make cheap, gross food cheap for a reason.
Yeah.
And I'm no conspiracy theorist, but there is something wrong that, you are marketing a bag of Doritos for $5, and you could literally, that lentils that we talked about, have an amazing protein fueled pot of carrots and potato, whatever, for $5. There's something fundamentally wrong, I believe, with our food culture. So I'm keenly aware of that. And I can obviously have conversation. I have many friends who are not food insecure, including my husband. But nobody knows what it's like to walk in the shoes and the angst that it can cause. So those would probably be the people that would be my homies I'd be a little closer to. Yeah.
What has been the response to the cookbook pop-ups? I know that I don't often see them. I don't think I've ever seen one. So when you kind of show up at a space or an event, what's the response?
Typically when they see this setup, I call it carefully curated cookbook collection, because you as a fellow librarian know that collection development, having, percentages of fiction, nonfiction, in the elementary school world, do I have enough space books? I mean, space, in the final frontier space. Do I have enough, animal books? Have I focused too much on mammals and all the things that go into collection development? And that's 23 years in the making of being on the job. And so I think I have a keen sense, and then also who you're, in this case, who my customer base is, who there are certain pop-ups where what I call my global collection, which is your, books on how to cook pho, how to cook Moroccan food, what have you. Those are really big sellers. Whereas I initially thought more of your basic cookbooks might be sort of, I'm thinking of an Ina Garden, a Magnolia Table, these kind of sort of good all-rounders, I call them. And those have not been my best sellers. My global books are my best sellers. And so the response has been great. The community has been great. I have met some incredible people who are just rooting for me. And to go back to what you said about it being the only pop-up, as far as I know, I'm the only cookbook pop-up. I have a feeling if there was a pop-up, as much as we have to do our own marketing, somebody would have reached out to me by now. It's been a year. So someone, I think, would have reached out by now and said, hey, I do a cookbook pop-up too. But know that there are only 5 in Kitchen Lingo in Long Beach, just opened up. Shout out to Kitchen Lingo. There are only 5 exclusively only sell cookbooks in the country. There are 5. So she was the 5th. So I don't think there's probably another cookbook pop-up. Maybe there is. That's okay. There's space for all of us. Just don't sell in Vegas. Just joking.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org.
So, yeah.
I was going to, because you brought up something that was interesting to me, is that I see a lot of remainders, and I see occasionally book pop-ups that they'll sell everything, all kinds of books, but they'll have cookbooks, but then, the stuff like the Ina Garten and the Gwyneth Paltrow books, etc. There's a type where it's the kind of non-world related cookbook, and there's not a lot. They're kind of all the same, and I notice there's always plenty of those, but I don't see as many. I don't ever see any remainders that are kind of world-related cookbooks, and I wonder about the printing runs, how they're doing on that. Do you think that there's kind of an inequality in like how much these books are being printed and how often they're seen?
The minute, I refuse to buy any cookbooks by Gwyneth Paltrow, by the way. So you will never find them. If you come into, she's not there. Okay. Yeah. Like, nod to her for I take selfies without makeup, but her and I are not the same people. We're right. Just not, she's boutique left is what I like to call it. Right. Yeah. So yeah. She goes to, rallies, in her Beamer and, just, I don't know. I don't even think she does that. I think she just writes checks, if she even does that. I don't know. But the candle thing is where I stepped away from the whole thing. Like, how can you say with a straight face that you literally are marketing a candle that smells like your vagina? Well, that's as low. Yeah, I know you're not working anymore, Gwyneth, but see, we shouldn't have even mentioned her because she's who is she to have a cookbook? Who's anybody, right?
But yeah, I see a lot of those though, and the people that are really doing the cooking that don't have maids and stuff.
Right. Really I could write a cookbook. Yeah, I could write a cookbook too if I had gone to 1,000 fitness retreats and all. Many of us could, right? And we would have a slew of editors.
I'm sure they're also ghostwritten largely, right? Come on, let's be real.
Right, exactly. So where is
that? You would actually write yours.
Right, yeah, I would have to because I unfortunately don't have that, and there'd probably be, glue on one page and something else where I was marking papers as well as writing the cookbook, and there'd be a 5th grader's drawing somewhere, I'd actually write it and do the work. And I can't say that she doesn't, and I'm not just picking on Gwyneth Paltrow, but I think that the books where you can tell, what I would like to call it, phoning it in, you can tell because there's no heart. And, maybe not everybody is as sensitive to that. But I look for cookbooks and cookbook authors and chefs and restaurants that are authentic, that you can feel their heart and passion on the plate or in the pages. And anything less than that is just inauthentic. And I'm like, you could have picked anything to be inauthentic about. Why did you have to? The foundation of life is sustenance. Why did you have to mess with that? Go do something else, like sell crypto, do something else, but don't come into the world that I love and admire and come with some crap, because I'm just one pop-up, but you won't see any of that. I like histories and stories, and you can just tell that. You can tell by the preface, even if it's a couple pages, you can tell if the person's got heart or not. So
well, it's funny because I feel like the books that are they're boutique cookbooks, let's call them, that are done by people that really are looking to be a lifestyle influencer. So they just put out this cookbook that somebody probably ghost wrote. They're all pretty much the same. I mean, you could open up 10 of them. They're pretty much, you wouldn't be able to tell who wrote it, and oftentimes it's all pictures of the lovely homes, etc., yada yada. But then I was trying to find in my library system cookbooks on Filipino food. Now I work in a very very extensive library system we have a lot of branches, right? So I was looking, and then I looked in Link Plus, which is a larger system, and it goes all through California, Nevada. And I found at most, if I could get them, 5 Filipino cookbooks. Now those are written in the last 20 years. Now that's just 5 cookbooks of Filipino cuisine. Now we're just starting now to see, it come out where more people are publishing them. So that's good. But many cultures, foods are underrepresented. And I don't think that the authors are getting the chance because they're too busy being elbowed out of the way by these boutique cookbook authors. I mean, because you see them. You go to the used bookstore and they're just millions of them.
Remember Silver Palette?
Yeah.
I mean, and
Absolutely.
I don't, honestly, I mean, I was just kind of getting out on my own. I mean, that was sort of very early, but I remember you had to have Silver Palette. And it was everywhere. It was everywhere. And I actually can't really speak on that they did a bunch of them because I haven't looked at one in years. So maybe it was good. But as far as branding and that brand, I mean, everything was Silver Palette. And now it's unless you're older, you're probably who, what, so I'm not sure. But I know I listened to the podcast. You had a Filipina cookbook author, a couple of,
and
that was lovely. Yeah. And here's what I would say about that, Dean. And I kind of hearken it to just the work that I do in social justice, right? So if more Black men are incarcerated, okay, unless you're willing to say, which some insane people are, that Black man, that Black boy was born genetically more predisposed for criminal activity. And there are some who would say that, I mean, that crazy eugenics argument. Unless you're willing to say that systematically something happened between birth and the time that child was incarcerated. The systematic disenfranchisement. So unless you're willing to say, in this case, let's use this, that all Filipino food is crap, which I beg to differ because, I absolutely love pancit and the crispy pata and all that. Then what would come next is that they are systemically being nudged out because both can't exist. You can't say this is a cuisine that has so many historical influences, obviously some of it because colonization, and that's terrible. But here we are today, and I don't mean to make light of it in any way, but these have had these influences on our cuisine. So if there isn't somewhat representation in publishing of that, then that means systematically and systemically something has happened. And so to me, it's just another instance of how people of color or people of even certain European genres. Let's look for Italian cookbooks. compared
Yeah.
to, I don't know, Austrian. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, we just decided, because we had this huge group of immigrants who, by the way, used to be treated terribly, including my Greek family immigrants were treated terribly.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, there's just, they were able to blend in, because I mean, look at the color of my skin. I'm 75% Greek. We were at one time marginalized. We are not anymore. You know, we just stepped on the necks of the next group coming, right? I mean, let's look at, I mean, the African diaspora. I mean, are you kidding me? The food, how many Ghanaian cookbooks are being published? As far as I know, two, and I have both of them for sale and own them. You know, I mean, it's crazy. It's just another way to, you know, discriminate and put bias into, you know, just one more corporate structure. Go figure, right?
Who are some of the cookbook writers that were really influential to you through the years that you keep coming back to?
I'm in love with Julia Child. It may sound trite. I think that she was an unflappable, strong advocate of what my version of feminism is. And my version of feminism is that you have choices. You have choices. She may, you know, have been raised in a certain way in the ranch in Texas of what women are supposed to do and not do. And so she had some of that sort of built into her DNA, but she knew she could do this TV thing. She had a husband who supported her in a time when, you know, she was too loud and too tall and too big and too whatever. And all they wanted to do was just minimize her and make her a 5'1" debutante, size 0. And she refused to be put into a box. And I love her. I love everything about her. And I recently my daughter and I stopped a couple days in Washington, D.C. on the way to Iceland. And I got to see her kitchen finally at the American History Museum. And I love her. I think that she set a tone that is wonderful. I think she introduced the American palate to things that were delightful. Yes. So she is probably my all-star. Go back to her book often. In fact, the one I had Simone listed first, because Simone, right. And so now, and that's mostly fallen apart. And I actually have it in like those things that you suck the air out of, those bags, you know, vacuum sealed kind of, because I don't want to lose it. But I got a new one and she's at the top, which I don't think Julia would have liked. I think she would have liked Simone being at the top, but she's not here to tell us. So her, and I mean, anything, I became enamored with Indian food about 25 years ago when I moved to England and found out about this whole genre of food that a girl from the Midwest had never tried. And so actually I tried it before that. I tried it in my early 20s and I thought it was okay, but I just didn't have a lot of access to it. And so I moved to a neighborhood that was very near a Sikh temple in Welland Hall, England, right outside of Birmingham. And just wanted to learn how to cook Indian food. And so that was my journey for many, many years. And still is, really. So I get on genres of cooking more than certain cookbooks, I would say, because I try to push myself. Yeah, that I would say, yeah. And I'm not much of a baker, not much of a baker. I wish I were.
What cookbooks are you reading right now?
So I'm reading Babish, Bit by Babish, Secrets of Colombian Cooking, probably looking to possibly retire to Colombia. I went on a trip by myself last summer to Bogota, just to go to visit Leo, which is Lenore Espinosa and her daughter Laura. And Leo, they call her Leo, Leonora was named the top female chef in the world. And I wanted to try her food. And I did. And it was breathtaking. She is, as well as most of South America right now, the culinary scene is about using indigenous forgotten grains and ingredients and so on and so forth. And I ate big ass ants are what they are, a protein source that indigenous people in Ecuador and Colombia have been eating for years and years. They're very tasty. And they do have big butts. They really do. They have big butts. So I went to Colombia, and then I came home, told my husband and my daughter, you guys, we have to go to Colombia. It's my new favorite place. Went in November, and my husband said, let's check out Cartagena. And if we like it, I think this is maybe where our future is. So Secrets of Colombian Cooking, I'm reading. I like a lot of culinary history as well. I'm reading Tortillas by Paula Morton. I was a little reluctant to purchase it because gave me a little bit of colonizer vibes. I looked up who Paula Morton was. She does appear and does say in her biography that she is a white cisgendered woman, American woman, but it's been a lovely read, and she really has done a lot of her research. Whose Samosa Isn't Anyway by Ved, History of Indian
I love that title.
Yes, Whose Samosa Isn't Anyway. And then just because I have to always have it by my bedside table as a source of comfort, Eating to Extinction by Dan Saldino.
That's a great one.
It changed my life, I think. I think it really honestly changed my life. And that's saying a lot because I read a lot of books. This notion of how the green movement of the 1970s screwed up the world's food source, basically. And they were unintended consequences. They didn't realize that morphing these grains and corns and so forth, supporting food movements, that are, slow food here in the US is one, and supporting organizations, foods, cookbooks, and authors and chefs who are using and including indigenous food, obviously sustainably sourced and so forth from indigenous communities. And so Colombia has gotten to be a real mine. So, yeah. And Iceland also. In Iceland, I went to Dill, which was their first, they actually have 2 Michelin star restaurants now. Their first Michelin star restaurant there. My daughter treated me on my birthday in March. And they're doing a lot also with using indigenous food sources in an upscale manner. And I think Gunnar is great. And Iceland is probably, I'm not sure I've been to a country that can compare to how close they are with the earth that they stand on.
I'd love to visit there. That sounds amazing.
I
know which restaurant, when you say Gunnar, I know who you're talking about. I want to go there. That sounds really good.
It's a breathtaking place, and the people are wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Nichole, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I'm going to put a link to your website in the bio so people can kind of track, maybe get your emails and track where you're going to be. Nichole, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
That was my conversation with Nichole Beer. You can go to the bio and look up her link to Lentil Pop-Up, which is her business, and you can check out where she's going to be next. I love talking to Nichole. Nichole, if you're listening to this, you have an open invitation to come back whenever you want. I'd love to have you on as many times as you'd like to be. Great talking to you. Also, next week, we're going to have Jenny Jeffries on. She's going to be talking about her book, For the Love of the Sea. It is a continuation of her series with The Love of the Land, where she talks about local food in different regions of England from farmers and people who produce seafood. Wonderful conversation with her. Please check that out next week. I hope you're all having a great week, and maybe you've cooked something from some of the cookbooks that we've had in the program. Until we see you again next week, keep on cooking.